On June 22, 1983, Rome melted under the merciless midday sun. The heat permeated every alley, reflected off the cobblestones, and made the air shimmer above the domes of the eternal city. On this sweltering day, a 15-year-old girl with dark hair and a deep, serious gaze walked out of the Vatican gates, never to return. In her hands was a flute, and in her head, dreams of music and ordinary teenage concerns, but fate had already set its traps on the Victor Emanuel II bridge. This moment became a point of no return, not only for one family, but for the entire history of the modern papacy. An ordinary trip to a music lesson turned into the beginning of one of the darkest labyrinths, where the interests of special services, financial machinations, the shadow world of organized crime, and sacred secrets hidden behind the high walls of the smallest state in the world intertwined. Emanuela Orlandi was not just a random teenager. She was a Vatican citizen, a status held by only a few hundred people on the entire planet. Her father served in the prefecture of the papal household, and the family lived in a unique, closed world where everyone knew everyone, and security seemed absolute and unshakable, like the rocks on which St. Peter's Basilica stands. It was this illusion of security that crumbled to dust that evening. She was last seen getting into a dark car, presumably a BMW, after a stranger approached her with an offer of easy money. He offered to distribute cosmetics at a fashion show for a sum that seemed astronomical for a schoolgirl of those years. This offer was bait, and the hook worked. A phone call to her sister, a short conversation, a promise to be home soon, and then silence that has lasted for over 40 years. Emanuela's disappearance instantly created a vacuum that began to fill with anxiety, and then panic. The first hours of the search resembled chaotic movement in a fog. The Rome police, accustomed to teenagers running away, initially paid no attention to it, believing that the girl had simply stayed out late with friends. But the Orlandi family knew Emanuella would never have made them worry. Inside the Vatican, time flowed differently, and the news of the missing daughter of an employee caused a shock that was carefully hidden behind outward calm. However, silence could not last forever. A few days later, the city was filled with flyers bearing her photograph, a smiling girl with a headband, an image that would soon become an icon of Italy's unsolved mysteries. Soon, the silence was broken by a phone call that moved this drama from the realm of crime news into the sphere of high geopolitics. An unknown caller, speaking with a slight accent which led the press to dub him the American, made demands. This was no ordinary monetary ransom. The voice demanded an exchange. Emanuela's freedom in exchange for the freedom of Mehmet Ali Agca, the Turkish terrorist who 2 years earlier, in May 1981, had shot Pope John Paul II in St. Peter's Square. Suddenly, the disappearance of a schoolgirl was linked to an assassination attempt on the head of the Catholic Church and the most complex intrigues of the Cold War. This demand created a bombshell effect. If the kidnappers were indeed connected to the Grey Wolves, the organization to which Agca belonged, then Emanuella had become a pawn in a game between East and West, between the special services of various countries. The investigation found itself drawn into a labyrinth of disinformation. The caller demonstrated astonishing knowledge of the details of the Orlandi family's life, describing the girl's clothes, recounting the contents of her bag, even mentioning the brand of her glasses. This was proof that Emanuella was indeed with them. But was the American a representative of an international terrorist network? Or was this merely a mask behind which entirely different forces were hidden? Parallel to the international terrorism theory, another, even darker thread began to emerge, leading into the depths of the Roman criminal underworld. In those years, Rome was controlled by a powerful group known as the Banda della Magliana. This was not just a street gang, but an octopus that had permeated all spheres of life, with connections to politicians, Freemasons, and, as it later turned out, Vatican financiers. The leader of the group, Enrico de Pedis, nicknamed Renatino, became a figure to whom the threads of the investigation led with frightening persistence. Witnesses claimed to have seen Emanuella in the company of people resembling gang members. But why would a powerful mafia kidnap the daughter of a simple clerk? The answer might lie not in politics, but in money. Huge amounts of money. In the early 1980s, the Vatican was shaken by financial scandals related to the Vatican Bank, or, as it is officially called, the Institute for the Works of Religion. At the head of the bank stood the powerful Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an untouchable and formidable figure. The collapse of the Banco Ambrosiano, with which the Vatican had close ties, left a huge hole in the budget and many angry creditors, among whom, according to rumor, was also the mafia, laundering its capital through church accounts. The hypothesis that emerged later was monstrous in its cynicism. Emanuela's kidnapping could have been a tool for blackmail, a way to pressure the Vatican to recover lost millions. The girl became living currency in dealings between gangsters and bankers in cassocks. These two external forces, international terrorists and local mafia, created a visible layer of the conflict. But beneath it surged an internal human layer, full of pain and despair. The Orlandi family found itself caught between the hammer of uncertainty and the anvil of state secrecy. Pope John Paul II publicly appealed 8 times for Emanuela's release, addressing her captors from the balcony during Sunday sermons. These appeals seemingly should have helped, but paradoxically, they only confirmed the high value of the hostage, raising the stakes in this cruel game. Every word from the pontiff made the kidnappers understand they had found a sore spot. For Emanuela's brother Pietro, this tragedy became the meaning of his entire life. From a young man, he turned into a gray-haired man whose gaze had not lost its determination, but was filled with deep sorrow. He knocked on every door, met with informants, and struggled through a web of lies and silence. His internal drama lay in the clash between his love for his sister and his loyalty to the system in which he grew up. The Vatican was not just a place of residence for the Orlandis, but a home, a spiritual homeland. The realization that the wall of silence was erected by those whom the family had served faithfully became an agonizing test of faith. Pietro repeatedly said that he felt betrayed. Vatican hierarchs, expressing sympathy in words, in reality closed archives and refused to cooperate with the investigation, citing sovereignty. Here we come to the third, deepest layer of the conflict, the ideological one. The Emanuela Orlandi case exposed a fundamental contradiction in the very nature of the Vatican. What is more important, the life of an innocent child or the reputation of a 1,000-year-old institution? Can a state that proclaims the highest moral values sacrifice truth to preserve its secrets? This is a conflict between the sacred and the secular, between the gospel and Machiavelli. If clergy were involved in the disappearance, then acknowledging this fact would inflict a colossal blow to the authority of the Church. It seems that the life of a girl and the sanctity of the Holy See were placed on the scales, and the choice was not made in favor of the person. This philosophical paradox turns a criminal story into a tragedy of ancient scale. Years passed, and the case acquired ever new, sometimes fantastic details, turning into a myth. Witnesses appeared who claimed to have seen Emanuella in monasteries in Luxembourg, in closed clinics in Switzerland, or in harems of Eastern countries. But each time, hope was replaced by disappointment. One of the most shocking turns was the confession of the former mistress of mafia boss De Pedis. In 2005, 15 years after De Pedis himself was shot dead on a Roman street, she stated that he had organized the kidnapping on the orders of certain powerful people. And most incredibly, she pointed to the burial site. It turned out that one of Rome's most brutal criminals, a gang leader, was buried with honors befitting a cardinal in the crypt of the Sant'Apollinare Basilica, the very basilica that was located in the building of the music school where Emanuella took her last lesson. This fact caused a storm of indignation. How was this possible? Who gave permission? The answers were vague, but the mere presence of the gangster's grave in a holy place became a symbol of corruption and the intertwining of crime with church authority. In 2012, the grave was opened. Emanuella's remains were not found there, but the very fact of this action showed how deeply darkness had penetrated. However, the real turning point, which transformed the perception of the entire story, occurred much later, when the so-called expense list leaked to the press. The document, whose authenticity the Vatican vehemently denies, allegedly contained a list of expenses for Emanuela Orlandi's maintenance outside Italy for many years after her disappearance. Bills for accommodation in a boarding house in London, medical expenses, transfers. The list ended with an entry from 1997. Transfer to the Vatican and conclusion of the case. If this document is not a fake, then it turns everything upside down. This would mean that the girl was alive for many more years, was under the full control of church structures, and her return home ended in a tragic finale. This turned the story of abduction into a story of the long, cold, and calculated detention of a person in captivity by the system itself. The transformation of the perception of the case intensified with the emergence of new generations of investigators and journalists. They began to ask questions not about who abducted, but why are they silent? It became obvious that the solution lay not in Turkey and not in the mafia underground, but within the Leonine walls. The Vatican ceased to be perceived as a victim of blackmail and began to be seen as the main keeper of the secret. Suspicions fell on internal vices. Rumors surfaced about closed parties, about Emanuella possibly becoming a victim of harassment by someone high-ranking, and the entire operation of her disappearance was merely a gigantic cover-up operation, cleaning up after an important person. The culmination of this multi-year tension came in the summer of 2019. The Orlandi family received an anonymous letter with a photograph of an angel statue in the Teutonic Cemetery inside the Vatican and the caption, "Look where the angel points." This cemetery is the resting place of German and Flemish nobility, a territory closed to outsiders. The indication led to the graves of two 19th-century princesses. Hope flared up again with incredible force. Could it be that after 36 years, the body would be found in the heart of the Vatican, a few hundred meters from her home? In July 2019, under the gaze of cameras from around the world, workers opened the tomb slabs. The world held its breath in anticipation. But when the heavy stones were moved, those present were overcome with horror and bewilderment. The tombs were empty. Not only were there no remains of Emanuella, there were not even the bones of the princesses themselves, who should have rested there for over 100 years. Emptiness. Sterile, frightening emptiness. It seemed like a mockery, a cruel trick. Where had the ancient burials disappeared to? Who had cleared this place? But the investigation did not stop there. During further inspection of the premises beneath the floor of the college adjacent to the cemetery, a secret ossuary room was discovered, and there, in the darkness of the underground, researchers stumbled upon thousands of bones, fragments of skeletons piled in a heap, adult and child, old and, possibly, more recent. This discovery caused a shock. Thousands of fragments that needed to be analyzed, dated, identified. The Vatican turned into a workplace for forensic experts. Every bone could be a key to the puzzle. Every fragment could belong to the missing girl. This event became a moment of truth, a convergence point for all lines. The walls that were supposed to preserve the peace of the deceased concealed chaos. The identification process took months. Experts sifted through fragment after fragment, comparing DNA, determining the age of the bones. The result was disheartening. Most of the remains were too old, dating back to past centuries. Among them, it was impossible to isolate a profile matching Emanuella. Another dead end, another emptiness. But this emptiness screamed louder than any evidence. It showed that within the Vatican, not only living people but also dead bodies could disappear, that there were secret passages and forgotten rooms where anything could be hidden. Despite the negative outcome of the examination, the resonance from the opening of the tombs was colossal. This event finally shattered the wall of inviolability. The Vatican was forced to justify itself, explain, open doors. In early 2023, 40 years after the disappearance, what the family had been striving for decades happened. The Vatican officially announced the reopening of the Emanuela Orlandi case. For the first time, the judicial authorities of the Holy See and the Roman prosecutor's office decided to combine their efforts. This decision was an acknowledgement that the shadow of the past was too thick to simply ignore. Why is this story so important today? Why does the disappearance of one teenager in the last century continue to disturb millions of people? Because the Orlandi case went beyond a private tragedy. It became a symbol of the struggle of a small person against a gigantic, opaque system. It is a story about the right to truth, which stands above state interests and diplomatic protocols. In today's world, where trust in institutions of power is falling, where conspiracy theories flourish on the soil of secrecy, Emanuela's fate serves as a reminder. Every secret has an expiration date, but parental pain does not. The lesson we draw from this story is harsh. Silence is complicity. Omerta, the law of silence attributed to the mafia, turned out to be inherent even in institutions far removed from crime. 40 years of silence, 40 years of half-truths and evasive answers have damaged the reputation of the Church, perhaps more than the truth itself, however bitter it may be. Society has learned to demand transparency. We see how the persistence of one person, Brother Pietro, can move ancient stones. This is a hymn to human resilience and to love that recognizes no statute of limitations. Today we look at photographs of Emanuella with the same question in our eyes. Her gaze from the black and white photograph has become demanding. She ceased to be merely a victim. She became a silent accuser. The case showed that evil can nest where we least expect to see it, and that the sanctity of a place does not guarantee the sanctity of the people who inhabit it. This is a destruction of illusions, painful but necessary for society's maturation. We no longer believe in the unconditional infallibility of authorities. We demand facts. Returning to the beginning, to that hot June day, we again see the girl with the flute walking down a sunny street. The sound of her steps faded 40 years ago, but the echo of that event rings ever louder. The circle has closed, but not shut. The flute has fallen silent, but the music of this tragedy continues to play, becoming increasingly unsettling. Each new document, each new testimony only adds notes to this requiem. We understand that the ending of this story has not yet been written. Perhaps the solution lies not in the ground, but in an archive, in a folder marked secret, in the memory of a man who lives out his days in the silence of a monastic cell. The mystery of Emanuela Orlandi remains an open wound in the heart of Rome. It is a reminder that justice is not a gift, but the result of struggle. And until the last stone is overturned, until the last word is spoken, this story will continue. The girl who went for a music lesson taught the whole world a lesson of a completely different kind, a lesson about the value of human life and about the fact that the light of truth cannot be hidden even in the deepest and darkest catacombs. Somewhere there, in the labyrinth of time and walls, the answer is still waiting to be found, and the search will not stop until the Vatican girl finds peace, and the world learns the name of the one who interrupted her song.